Hello friends. Did you know that nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy the content, I'd truly appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your interaction not only supports the channel's growth, but also helps these stories reach more people. Thank you all for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. My name is Silas Crowder, and I've been running these Appalachian mountains for 17 years now. Seen more fog, rain, and black ice than any man ought to, but I've never seen anything like what happened on Route 52 through West Virginia that night in October 2023. I was hauling a load of furniture from a manufacturer in Beckley down to Charlotte, North Carolina. Standard run I'd done maybe 50 times before. The money was decent, nothing spectacular, but steady work that kept food on my table and diesel in my tank. What made this trip different was the detour. Now, I-77 south through West Virginia is usually my go-to route. Straight shot, well-maintained, plenty of truck stops. But that Tuesday night my CB started crackling with reports of a massive accident near the Virginia border. Multi-vehicle pileup, they said. Highway closed for at least 8 hours while they cleared the mess and investigated fatalities. Eastbound and westbound, this is Big Bear on the flip-flop, came the voice over Channel 19. I-77 shut down tighter than a tick's ass from mile marker 42 all the way to the state line. Dots routing everybody onto Route 52 through the mountains. Add about 2 hours to your run, but it beats sitting in traffic till sunrise. Route 52. I knew that road, or thought I did. Used to be the main highway through southern West Virginia back in the day, before the interstate system came through. Winding mountain road, steep grades, dangerous curves, but it was still open, still maintained. I'd driven it maybe 3-4 times over the years when weather made I-77 impassable. So I took exit 28 and pointed my Peterbilt east toward Route 52. Same as about 20 other trucks I could see doing the identical thing. We formed a loose convoy through the smaller roads. CB chatter keeping us informed about conditions ahead. Normal trucker stuff, where the speed traps were, which truck stops had clean bathrooms, who was buying coffee at the next stop. But as we got deeper into the mountains, the chatter started dying off. One by one, the voices on the radio went quiet. First, Big Bear stopped responding. Then, Moondog went silent. By the time I hit the connection to Route 52 proper, I couldn't raise anybody on any channel. That should have been my first warning. Route 52 looked exactly like I remembered it. 2-lane blacktop snaking through dense forest. Yellow lines freshly painted, proper road signs every mile or so. The pavement was in good condition, recently resurfaced by the look of it. My headlights cut through the darkness ahead, illuminating the familiar guardrails and reflective markers that marked the more dangerous curves. For the first hour, everything seemed normal. Steep climb up the mountain, careful navigation around hairpin turns, engine working hard to pull 80,000 pounds up grades that hit 12% in some spots. Standard mountain driving that I'd done thousands of times before. But gradually, I started noticing things that didn't add up. First was the wildlife. Deer, bear, even mountain cats would normally scatter when they heard a big rig coming through their territory. But the animals I was seeing in my headlights weren't running. They were just standing there, watching my truck pass. Not frozen in fear, like deer sometimes do, but actively watching, turning their heads to follow my movement as I drove by. Second was the fog, thick, unnatural fog that seemed to roll uphill instead of settling in the valleys like it should. The fog moved with purpose, flowing around my truck like it was alive, creating shapes in my peripheral vision that looked almost human before dissolving back into gray mist. Third was the temperature. My cab thermometer was reading the outside air at 31 degrees, but I could see my breath fogging inside the truck, even with the heater running full blast. The cold was getting through the insulation, through the windows, through every seal and gap in ways that defied physics. But the thing that really made my skin crawl was the mile markers. I'd been driving for over 2 hours when I passed mile marker 23. Normal enough, but 20 minutes later, I passed mile marker 23 again. Same sign, same distinctive dent in the post, same graffiti scratched into the reflective surface. I figured I'd gotten turned around somehow, maybe missed a junction in the fog. Mountain roads can be confusing, especially at night. So I kept driving, paying closer attention to the landmarks. But mile marker 23 kept appearing, every 15 to 20 minutes like clockwork. The same sign, the same location, the same impossible repetition that told me I was driving in a circle even though the road felt like it was going straight. That's when I tried my CB radio again. Breaker 19. This is Iron Mountain looking for any driver on Route 52. Anybody out there copy? Static for about 30 seconds. Then a voice came through, clear as day, but somehow wrong. Iron Mountain, this is Phantom Rider. I copy you on Route 52. What's your 20? Just past mile marker 23 for the, hell, I don't know how many times. Road seems to be looping back on itself. You experiencing anything similar? Negative, Iron Mountain. Route 52's running straight and true for me. Been driving this road for 35 years, never had any problems. 35 years. That nagged at me for some reason I couldn't quite identify. What's your destination, Phantom Rider? Oh, just making my regular run. Same route I've been driving since 1989. Coal truck, you know. Keeping the lights on down in Charlotte. The words hit me like a physical blow. I'd done my homework on these mountain routes, had to, for insurance and DOT compliance. Route 52 through this section of West Virginia had been permanently closed in 1991 after a series of fatal accidents. 17 people died in a single winter when the road became impassable due to landslides and structural failures. The state had diverted all traffic to I-77 and let Route 52 revert to Forest Service roads in most places. This section of Route 52 had been abandoned for over 30 years, but I was driving on it. The pavement was real under my tires. The mile markers were reflecting my headlights. The guardrails were solid when I got close enough to see them clearly. Everything looked maintained, current, legitimate. Phantom Rider, can you tell me what year you think it is? Long pause on the radio. When the voice came back, it sounded different. Confused, maybe a little angry. What kind of question is that, driver? It's 1989, same as it's always been. Tuesday night, October 15th, 1989. Why you asking fool questions? October 15th, 1989. I checked my dashboard calendar. October 17th, 2023. Phantom Rider, I need you to listen to me carefully. Route 52 through this section was closed permanently in 1991. It's been abandoned for over 30 years. You need to... The radio exploded with static so loud it felt like it was going to blow my speakers. When the noise finally died down, I heard something that made every hair on my body stand up. It was the sound of metal tearing, tires screaming on asphalt, and men screaming in terror. The sound of a massive vehicle accident, broadcast live over Channel 19. I could hear a coal truck's engine revving desperately, the hiss of air brakes failing, the sickening crunch of metal against rock. and through it all, Phantom Rider's voice, growing fainter and more distant. "Can't hold her. Brakes are gone. Tell my wife, tell Sarah I'm sorry." Then silence. I don't know how long I sat there, hands shaking on the steering wheel, staring at the mile marker 23 that had appeared in my headlights once again. But eventually, I noticed something different. There was another truck approaching from the opposite direction. I could see its headlights cresting the hill ahead of me, two bright beams cutting through the fog. As it got closer, I could make out the distinctive profile of an old coal truck, the kind they used to run in these mountains back in the 80s and 90s. Tall exhaust stacks, wide grille, the characteristic shape of a truck designed for heavy hauling on dangerous roads. The truck was maintaining its lane, coming toward me at what looked like normal highway speed. But something about its approach felt wrong. The headlights were too steady, too bright, and they seemed to be growing larger without the truck actually getting closer. I flashed my high beams in the standard trucker greeting, but the approaching truck didn't respond. No flash back, no change in speed or direction, just that steady approach that seemed to go on forever. When the truck was maybe 100 yards away, I could see that it was indeed a coal hauler. Covered load, West Virginia plates, the kind of rig that had been common in these mountains 30 years ago. But the truck looked brand new, like it had just rolled off the assembly line. No rust, no road wear, paint job that gleamed even in the fog. The driver was visible through the windshield now, and what I saw made my blood turn to ice water. The cab was empty. No driver behind the wheel, no movement in the passenger seat, no sign that anyone was controlling the vehicle. The coal truck was driving itself down a highway that had been closed for 30 years, approaching my truck with mechanical precision. I laid on my air horn, 5 long blasts that echoed off the mountains. The approaching truck never wavered, never slowed, never showed any sign that its non-existent driver had heard the warning. With 50 yards between us, I made a decision that probably saved my life. I cranked my wheel hard right and drove my truck off Route 52, crashing through the guardrail and down the mountainside. The impact threw me against my seatbelt hard enough to crack a rib, and my truck slid sideways down a slope covered with dead trees and loose rock. But I managed to keep it upright, and after what felt like an eternity of sliding and bouncing, my truck came to rest against a stand of pine trees. I sat there for maybe 10 minutes, engine ticking as it cooled, emergency flashers painting the forest red and orange. When I finally climbed out to assess the damage, I looked back up toward Route 52. There was no road. Where I had been driving just minutes before, there was nothing but dense forest. Old growth trees that had been standing for decades, maybe centuries. No cleared right-of-way, no pavement, no guardrails. Just wilderness that looked like it had never been touched by human development. I hiked up the slope, thinking maybe I was disoriented. Maybe the accident had confused my sense of direction. But when I reached the ridge where Route 52 should have been, I found only a game trail barely wide enough for a deer. My GPS showed my location as approximately where the old Route 52 had run, but according to the satellite map, I was in the middle of Monongahela National Forest. No roads for miles in any direction except I-77, which was still showing closed due to the accident. I had to call for a heavy wrecker to pull my truck out of the woods, which took until sunrise and cost me more money than I made on the entire furniture haul. The wrecker operator was a local guy who'd lived in these mountains his whole life. "You're lucky you weren't hurt worse," he told me, while we waited for his equipment to get positioned. "A lot of truckers have gone off the road around here over the years. Most of them don't walk away. You ever hear of drivers seeing things on the old Route 52? I asked. He stopped what he was doing and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "What kind of things? Trucks that shouldn't be there," roads that shouldn't exist. He was quiet for a long time, working with his chains and rigging. Finally, he said, "My daddy used to drive coal trucks through here back in the 80s. He was one of the lucky ones who made it out before they closed the road." Lucky how? October 15th, 1989. 17 coal trucks went up that mountain in a convoy. Only 12 came down. 5 drivers just vanished, trucks and all. State police searched for weeks, never found so much as a tire track. What happened to them? Nobody knows for sure, but the drivers who survived, they all told the same story. Said they could see the missing trucks in their mirrors, following behind them like nothing had happened. Could hear them on the CB, talking about road conditions, weather, normal stuff. But when they'd look back, there was nothing there. He finished securing my truck to his wrecker and climbed back into his cab. But before he closed the door, he said one more thing. "Road's been officially closed for 32 years now, but every October 15th we get calls about truckers seeing lights on the old Route 52. Always coal trucks, always the same description. 5 trucks running in convoy, looking for the way down the mountain." The drive back to civilization took 2 hours on back roads I'd never seen before. My truck was damaged but drivable, and I managed to complete my delivery to Charlotte only 8 hours behind schedule. The customer docked my pay for the delay, but I didn't argue. I was just grateful to be alive. But the story doesn't end there. 3 weeks later, I received a package in the mail. No return address, postmark from a town in West Virginia that doesn't exist anymore. Inside was a CB radio, an old Cobra 29 like truckers used to run back in the 80s. Attached to the radio was a note written in pencil on a piece of paper that looked like it had been torn from a logbook. "Thanks for trying to help, Iron Mountain. Radio still works good. Maybe you can warn the next driver. Phantom Rider." I threw the radio away, but it showed up on my doorstep the next morning. Tried giving it to Goodwill, but they called me the same day saying someone had returned it with my name and address. Finally, I locked it in a storage unit and changed the combination. That was 8 months ago. Yesterday, I got a call from the storage facility. They said my unit had been broken into, but nothing was missing. When I went to check, the CB radio was gone, but there was a new note in its place. October 15th is coming again. 5 trucks still looking for the way home. If you're ever back on Route 52, keep Channel 19 open. We're still out here, running the same route, waiting for someone to show us the way down the mountain. I've changed my routes since then. Take I-64 through Virginia now, even though it adds a day to my Carolina runs. Won't drive through southern West Virginia at all anymore, especially not in October. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm running empty through the mountains, my CB picks up traffic on Channel 19. 5 voices, always the same 5 voices, talking about road conditions on a highway that doesn't exist anymore. They're still up there, still running Route 52 in an endless loop, still looking for the way home. And every October 15th, they reach out to any driver who will listen, hoping someone can guide them off that mountain and back to the world of the living. I ain't that driver. Some roads are meant to stay closed, and some journeys are meant to last forever. But if you're ever driving through West Virginia in October, and your CB starts picking up chatter about coal trucks on Route 52, do yourself a favor. Turn that radio off and keep driving. Don't try to help them like I did, because once you make contact with the drivers of Route 52, they never stop trying to add you to their convoy. And that's a run that has no destination, no delivery date, and no way home. Name's Ezra Whitfield. Been pulling freight through these Kentucky mountains for 14 years now. What I'm about to tell you happened last March, and it nearly cost me everything I'd worked for in this industry. Sometimes the most dangerous thing on the road isn't other drivers, bad weather, or mechanical failure. It's your own mind when it's pushed past its breaking point. I was running a load of manufactured goods from Louisville down to Knoxville, Tennessee. Nothing special about the cargo, just pallets of household items for a retail distribution center. Standard overnight haul that paid decent money and should have been routine. But nothing about that run was routine because I was falling apart behind the wheel. My wife Sarah had been diagnosed with breast cancer 2 weeks prior, and the medical bills were already piling up faster than I could make payments. Insurance was fighting us on every treatment, every test, every prescription. I'd been taking every load my dispatcher offered, pushing my hours of service right to the legal limit, living on truck stop coffee and whatever pills would keep me alert. Been running on maybe 4 hours of sleep total over 3 days, grabbing cat naps in parking lots when I absolutely had to. My logbook was a work of fiction, showing legal rest periods that never happened. Any experienced driver knows that's how you end up in a ditch or worse, but when you're drowning in debt and your family's counting on you, you make stupid choices. The signs were there from the start of that run. Couldn't remember loading the trailer, even though I must have supervised it myself. Kept finding CB conversations half-finished, like I'd started talking to other drivers and forgot what I was saying. My hands were shaking so bad from caffeine that I could barely sign the shipping paperwork. It was around 11:30 p.m. on a Tuesday when things really started going sideways. Been driving since noon, weather turning nasty with a March snowstorm making the mountain roads treacherous. Visibility was down to maybe 50 yards, and I was fighting to keep my eyes open when I saw the sign. Mountaineer Travel Plaza, next exit, all services available. Now, I'd run US 27 through eastern Kentucky hundreds of times. Knew every truck stop, every rest area, every place you could safely park a big rig. There wasn't supposed to be any travel plaza at that exit, but fatigue plays tricks on your memory, makes you doubt things you know for certain. More than that, I needed somewhere safe to stop before I fell asleep at the wheel and became another DOT statistic. The travel plaza looked perfect. Big lot designed for semis, diesel islands under bright canopies, main building with warm lights cutting through the snow. Maybe a dozen other trucks already parked, their marker lights creating a constellation in the storm. Everything an exhausted driver wants to see. I pulled in and found a spot toward the back, going through my routine on autopilot. Set the brakes, killed the engine, grabbed my logbook to make another fake entry about rest time I wasn't actually getting. My handwriting looked like a drunk kindergartner's, another sign I was losing it. Walking toward the building, I started noticing things that should have set off alarm bells. The other trucks were all vintage iron. Old Kenworths and Peterbilts with long hoods and chrome everywhere. The kind of equipment you see at truck shows, not working freight yards. But my brain was running on fumes, desperate for coffee and a warm place to sit. Inside, it was like stepping back 30 years. Rotary phones on the walls, cigarette machines, a lunch counter with cracked vinyl stools. The kind of truck stop that disappeared when the big chains took over. But the coffee smelled real, and the woman behind the counter smiled like she actually gave a damn about drivers. "You look like you've been rode hard and put away wet," she said, pouring coffee into a heavy ceramic mug. "How many hours you've been pushing?" I found myself telling her everything. Sarah's cancer, the insurance battles, the financial pressure that kept me taking loads when I should have been home. She listened like truck stop clerks used to do, back when they were part of the community instead of corporate employees. "Rooms available if you need real rest," she said, sliding me an old-fashioned room key. Sometimes a driver's got to know when to park it, regardless of what the load schedule says. The room was basic but clean, with a bed that actually looked comfortable instead of the thin mattresses most truck stop motels provide. I set my phone alarm and collapsed, still in my clothes, into the first real sleep I'd had in days. Woke up to sunlight and my phone going crazy with missed calls. 17 from my dispatcher, 12 from Sarah, messages from other drivers asking where I was. According to the call log, I'd been unreachable for 11 hours. But when I looked out the window, there was no travel plaza. No building, no other trucks, no diesel pumps. Just my rig sitting on the shoulder of US 27 with snow piled up on the windshield. Engine was still running. Had to be, or I would have frozen to death. My CB crackled with morning chatter from other drivers, and I keyed up to check in. "This is Smoky Mountain Express. Anybody got their ears on?" "Smoky Mountain, this is Big Bear eastbound. You've been sitting on the shoulder all night near mile marker 89. Everything all right over there?" Mile marker 89. Exactly where that travel plaza had been. But according to Big Bear and every other driver on Channel 19, there was no truck stop there. Never had been. I called my dispatcher, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. "Ezra, where the hell have you been? Your GPS tracker showed you stopped for 11 hours. Customers breathing down my neck about their delivery. Had to take emergency rest," I said. "Dot compliance. On the shoulder of the highway, in a snowstorm, what were you thinking?" Truth was, I didn't know what I'd been thinking. The receipt in my shirt pocket said Mountaineer Travel Plaza, but my GPS showed nothing but forest at those coordinates. Either I'd found a truck stop that didn't exist, or my mind had created one when I needed it most. The next 100 miles to Knoxville were hell. Every mile marker looked familiar, like I'd driven that stretch before even though I knew I hadn't. Other drivers kept checking on me over the CB, concerned about the brother who'd been parked in the storm all night. Made the delivery, but barely. Hands shaking so bad I could barely sign the paperwork. Kept losing track of conversations with the receiving clerk. The forklift operator asked if I was feeling all right. Said I looked like I'd seen a ghost. Maybe I had. Drove straight to the nearest truck stop with a medical clinic. One of those DOT physical places that cater to drivers. Told the nurse practitioner I was having problems with fatigue and stress, might need to be taken off duty for a few days. She took one look at me, bloodshot eyes, trembling hands, couldn't sit still, and pulled out her blood pressure cuff. "When's the last time you slept more than 2 hours straight?" "Can't remember." "How much caffeine you consuming daily?" "However much it takes to stay awake." She didn't lecture me, just explained what sleep deprivation does to your brain, how it can cause hallucinations that seem completely real, make you see things that aren't there, hear voices on the CB that never transmitted. "Lot of drivers go through this," she said. "Industry pressure, family pressure, financial pressure. It all adds up. Your brain created what you needed when you needed it. Made you stop before you killed yourself or someone else." She gave me a medical card showing temporarily unfit for duty. Recommended 3 days of real sleep before getting back behind the wheel. Most importantly, she didn't report it to DOT as a safety violation. Treated it like the medical emergency it was. Spent those 3 days in a real truck stop motel, sleeping 14 hours at a stretch and eating actual food instead of caffeine pills. Called Sarah every few hours to check in, started working out a payment plan with the medical bills that didn't require me killing myself on the road. When I went back to work, I made changes. Started turning down loads that would push my hours. Carried healthy food instead of relying on truck stop junk. Cut my caffeine intake to normal human levels. Most importantly, I started talking to other drivers about the pressure we all face. Turns out I wasn't alone. Half the drivers I knew had stories about seeing things during long hauls, phantom truck stops, conversations on the CB that nobody else heard, exits that appeared when you needed them most. The industry doesn't talk about it because admitting hallucinations can cost you your CDL. But we're out here, running millions of miles every year, dealing with financial pressure and family stress while operating 80,000-pound vehicles on public highways. Sometimes our minds create what we need to survive, even if what we need doesn't actually exist. I still have that receipt from Mountaineer Travel Plaza. Real paper, real ink, showing charges for coffee, food, and a room at a business that never existed. Keep it in my wallet as a reminder of what happens when you push too far. That hallucination probably saved my life, forced me to rest when my conscious mind was too driven to allow it. But it also taught me that the trucking industry's culture of push through anything can be deadly when taken too far. 6 months later, Sarah's treatment was successful, and she's been cancer-free ever since. We learned to manage the medical debt without me having to destroy my health in the process. Found out there are resources available for families dealing with medical crises, but you have to ask for help. The hardest part was admitting I wasn't superhuman, that I had limits like every other driver on the road. But accepting those limits didn't make me a worse trucker. It made me a safer one. If you're reading this and you're running on fumes, seeing things that might not be there, hearing voices on the CB that don't respond when you key up, find a real place to park and get real help. The freight will wait, the customers will understand, and your family needs you alive more than they need the money. Because the most important load you'll ever haul is yourself, and you can't deliver that cargo if you break down trying to prove how tough you are. The Mountaineer Travel Plaza may not have been real, but the lesson it taught me was. Sometimes, the best thing a driver can do is admit when it's time to park the truck and take care of yourself. And that's advice that could save your life, even if it comes from a truck stop that exists only in your mind. The name's Jasper McKinney, and I've been running freight through these Tennessee mountains for 19 years. Never believed in ghosts or spirits or any of that supernatural nonsense until what happened to me on US 25W near Cove Lake in November of 2022. What I experienced that night changed my whole understanding of what's possible in these old coal mining hills. I was deadheading back from a delivery in Corbin, Kentucky, running empty trailer back to my terminal in Knoxville. It was one of those crisp November nights where you can see your breath and the stars look close enough to touch. Good driving weather, clear roads, making decent time despite the mountain grades. Around 2:30 a.m., I was coming down the backside of Cumberland Gap when my CB radio crackled to life with a transmission that immediately grabbed my attention. The voice was clear but strained, like someone trying to stay calm in an emergency situation. Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. This is Blue Ridge Mining Truck number 47 with an emergency situation. We have multiple injuries and need immediate assistance. GPS coordinates 36.3847 north, 84.1592 west. Repeat, we need immediate medical assistance at coordinates 36.3847 north, 84.1592 west. Blue Ridge Mining. I knew that name from the history of this area. They'd operated several coal operations through these mountains back in the 70s and 80s before shutting down due to safety violations and financial problems. But the company had been defunct for at least 20 years. I keyed my microphone. Blue Ridge Mining Truck 47. This is Iron Ridge hauling southbound on 25W. I copy your Mayday call. What's the nature of your emergency? The response came back immediately, the relief evident in the driver's voice. Iron Ridge, thank God somebody heard us. We had a cave-in at the number 3 mine entrance. Got 3 men trapped and 2 more hurt bad. Been trying to raise somebody for over an hour. A cave-in. In 2022, most of the old mine entrances in this area had been sealed for decades due to safety concerns. The few active mining operations used modern strip mining techniques, not the deep shaft mines that Blue Ridge had operated. Blue Ridge 47, what's your exact location? I've got GPS and can try to reach you. We're about a quarter mile up the dirt road from the main highway, just past the old company store. You can't miss the mine entrance. We got emergency lights set up and a couple trucks parked outside. I punched the coordinates into my GPS system. The location showed up as a point in the mountains about 6 miles off US 25 West, accessible by what looked like an old mining road. According to my mapping software, the area was listed as abandoned industrial site, with warnings about hazardous conditions and unstable terrain. But if people were hurt, I couldn't just ignore the call. I'd been trained in basic first aid as part of my commercial driving certification, and my truck carried emergency medical supplies that might help until proper rescue teams could arrive. Blue Ridge 47, I'm about 15 minutes from your location. I'll head up there and see what I can do to help. You might want to call 911 and get proper emergency services rolling. Already tried, Iron Ridge. Can't get a cell signal up here, and our radio won't reach town from inside the hollow. You're the first driver to respond to our calls. That made sense. These mountain hollows were notorious for poor cell coverage, and CB radio range was limited by terrain. If they were in a deep valley surrounded by ridges, they might only be able to reach passing traffic on the main highway. I took the exit the GPS indicated and found myself on a narrow mountain road that hadn't been maintained in years. Potholes, washouts, vegetation growing up through cracks in the asphalt. The kind of road that mining companies used to build to access remote operations, then abandoned when the coal played out. My truck's headlights illuminated forest that looked like it hadn't been disturbed in decades. But according to the GPS, I was heading in the right direction toward the coordinates the Blue Ridge driver had given me. After about 20 minutes of careful driving on increasingly poor road surface, I reached what appeared to be the end of the maintained road. But there was a dirt track continuing up the mountainside, rutted and steep but passable for a careful driver. Blue Ridge 47, this is Iron Ridge. I'm at the end of the paved road, about to head up the dirt track. How much further to your location? Iron Ridge. You should see our lights any minute now. We're right at the mine entrance, can't miss it. I continued up the dirt road, scanning ahead for any sign of emergency lights or vehicles. But after another 10 minutes of climbing, I hadn't seen anything except dense forest and rock outcroppings. My GPS showed I was very close to the coordinates, but there were no lights visible anywhere. Blue Ridge 47. I'm at your GPS coordinates, but I don't see any lights or vehicles. Can you give me better directions? Iron Ridge. We can hear your engine. You're real close now. Just follow the road around the next bend and you'll see the mine entrance. We got 3 trucks parked outside and emergency flashers going. I rounded the next curve and found myself in a small clearing that had obviously been used for mining operations at some point in the past. There were the remains of concrete foundations, rusted mining equipment, and what looked like a sealed mine entrance built into the hillside. But no trucks, no emergency lights, no people. The mine entrance had been sealed with concrete blocks and steel bars, and warning signs posted by the Tennessee Department of Environmental Conservation. Danger. Abandoned mine. Do not enter. Unstable structure. Toxic gases present. According to the signs, the mine had been permanently closed in 1983 due to structural collapse and environmental contamination. I parked my truck and climbed down to investigate the area more thoroughly. The clearing showed no signs of recent activity, No tire tracks, no footprints, no indication that vehicles had been here any time in the past several years. Vegetation was growing right up to the sealed mine entrance, and the concrete barriers looked like they'd been in place for decades. But my CB radio was still receiving transmissions from Blue Ridge 47. Iron Ridge, where are you? We can hear your truck, but we don't see you. We're right here, at the mine entrance with the emergency lights. I keyed my microphone. Blue Ridge 47, I'm standing right at the mine entrance coordinates you gave me. The mine is sealed and there's nobody here. Are you sure about your location? Iron Ridge, that's impossible. We're looking right at the mine entrance and we can see 3 men trapped inside. The cave-in happened about 2 hours ago during the night shift change. We need medical assistance immediately. Night shift change? In 1983, Blue Ridge Mining had operated around-the-clock extraction at this location. But the mine had been permanently closed after a series of accidents, including at least one major cave-in that had killed several miners. I walked closer to the sealed entrance and noticed something that made my blood run cold. There were sounds coming from inside the mine. Muffled voices, the sound of machinery running, even what sounded like men calling for help from deep inside the mountain. But that was impossible. The mine had been sealed for almost 40 years. Even if someone had managed to break through the barriers, the air inside would be toxic and the structure too unstable to support human life. Blue Ridge 47, can you describe what you're seeing? Because I'm looking at a mine that's been sealed since 1983. Long pause on the radio. When the voice came back, it sounded confused and distant. Iron Ridge, I don't understand what you mean. This is November 15th, 1983. We just had the cave-in tonight during shift change. Are you saying you can't see our trucks? November 15th, 1983. I checked my truck's dashboard clock. November 15th, 2022. Exactly 39 years later. Blue Ridge 47, what year do you think it is? Another long pause. When the driver responded, his voice sounded strained and desperate. It's 1983, driver. November 15th, 1983. We've got men trapped in this mine and we need help now. Why are you asking strange questions instead of helping us? I was receiving a radio transmission from someone who believed it was 1983, calling for help with a mine accident that had happened 39 years ago. Either someone was playing an elaborate hoax, or I was somehow picking up radio signals from the past. I researched the mine's history on my phone, using the weak cellular signal I could pick up from the ridge. The information I found made my hands shake. On November 15th, 1983, Blue Ridge Mining Company had experienced a catastrophic cave-in at their No. 3 mine operation. 7 miners were trapped underground when part of the main tunnel collapsed during the night shift change. Rescue operations continued for 3 days, but all 7 men were eventually declared dead when toxic gases and unstable structure made further rescue attempts impossible. Among the victims was the mine's safety coordinator, a man named Thomas "Tommy" Briggs, who had been operating the company's emergency response truck, vehicle number 47. Blue Ridge 47, is this Tommy Briggs? The response came immediately, filled with surprise and relief. Iron Ridge, yes. This is Tommy Briggs with Blue Ridge Truck 47. How did you know my name? Are you with the rescue team? Tommy Briggs had died in the mine collapse on November 15th, 1983. But somehow, his emergency radio calls were still being transmitted 39 years later, reaching across time to any trucker who happened to be in the right location at the right time. Tommy, I need you to listen to me carefully. The year is 2022, not 1983. The mine collapsed 39 years ago. You and the trapped miners, you didn't make it. The rescue teams tried for 3 days, but they couldn't reach you in time. Dead silence on the radio for almost 5 minutes. When Tommy's voice finally came back, it was quiet and thoughtful. That would explain a lot of things, Iron Ridge. We've been calling for help for what feels like days now, but nobody ever comes. And the men trapped in the mine, they stopped responding to our calls hours ago. Tommy, where are you right now? What do you see? I'm sitting in my truck at the mine entrance, same as always. Got my emergency flashers going, radio equipment set up, first aid supplies ready. But now that I think about it, I can't remember eating anything. Can't remember getting tired or needing to sleep. And my truck's fuel gauge hasn't moved despite running the engine all night. He was describing the experience of being trapped between life and death, unable to move on, but unable to fully return to the world of the living, stuck in an eternal loop of trying to coordinate a rescue operation that would never succeed. Tommy, the mine is sealed now, has been for decades. The company shut down after the accident, and the state sealed all the entrances due to safety concerns. I figured something like that must have happened. Blue Ridge was already having financial problems before the accident. A disaster like this would have finished them off. I spent the next hour talking to Tommy Briggs, learning about the final night of Blue Ridge Mining's No. 3 operation. He described the cave-in in detail, how it happened, who was trapped, what the rescue efforts were like from his perspective as the safety coordinator trying to manage the emergency response. But gradually, his transmissions began to fade. The signal grew weaker, his voice more distant, as if he was finally able to let go of his responsibility now that someone had acknowledged what had happened. Iron Ridge, I want to thank you for listening to my calls. Been trying to get help for these boys for, well, I guess it's been 39 years now. Time gets funny when you're stuck between worlds. Tommy, are you able to move on now? Find some peace? I think so. The boys are with me now. I can see them walking out of the mine. They look good, not hurt anymore. And there's a light up ahead that feels warm and welcoming. That sounds right, Tommy. You did everything you could to help them. Nobody could have asked for more. I know that now, but it's hard to let go when people are counting on you, even after you can't help them anymore. His voice was getting fainter, more distant, but I could still hear him clearly. Iron Ridge, if you ever talk to anybody from Blue Ridge Mining, family members, other miners who worked these hills, you tell them that Tommy Briggs stayed at his post until the end. Tell them we did everything we could to get those boys out safe. I'll tell them, Tommy, you have my word. Appreciate it, driver. And if you ever hear other emergency calls from these old mines, you try to help if you can. A lot of good men died in these mountains, and some of them are still trying to look out for their buddies. The radio went silent after that. Not the usual static of a weak signal, but complete silence, like the frequency had been permanently abandoned. I stood in that clearing for another 20 minutes, listening for any further transmissions. But the CB radio remained quiet, except for the occasional chatter from other truckers on the main highway miles below. When I finally climbed back into my truck and prepared to leave, I noticed something that hadn't been there before. Fresh flowers had been placed near the sealed mine entrance. 7 small bouquets, one for each miner who had died in the collapse. But there were no footprints in the dirt around the flowers, no vehicle tracks to indicate how they had gotten there. They were just there, as if they had materialized out of thin air as a final memorial to the men who had died trying to extract coal from the mountain. I drove back down to US 25W and continued my journey to Knoxville. But before I reached my terminal, I made a detour to the Campbell County Historical Society to research the Blue Ridge mining accident and find contact information for any surviving family members. The Historical Society had extensive records of the 1983 disaster, including photographs of the rescue operation and biographical information about the miners who had died. Tommy Briggs had been 34 years old, married with 2 children, and had worked for Blue Ridge for 8 years before the accident. He was described by co-workers as dedicated, professional, and the kind of man who would never abandon his post, even in the face of mortal danger. I was able to locate his widow, Sarah Briggs, who was now in her 70s and living in a assisted care facility in Knoxville. When I visited her and told her about my experience, she wasn't surprised. Tommy was always like that, she told me. Once he took responsibility for something, he'd see it through no matter what. I've been wondering for 39 years if he was able to find peace after the accident. I think he has now, Mrs. Briggs. He wanted me to tell you that he stayed at his post until the end, and that he did everything he could for those miners. She smiled through tears. That sounds like my Tommy. Always thinking about other people first. Mrs. Briggs told me that over the years, several truckers had contacted her with similar stories about radio transmissions from the sealed mine. Emergency calls from Blue Ridge Truck 47, requests for rescue assistance, messages from miners who had been dead for decades. It happens every November 15th, she explained, the anniversary of the accident. Tommy's still up there trying to coordinate rescue operations for his boys. At least, he was until now. I asked if she wanted to visit the mine site, maybe leave flowers or say a final goodbye, but she shook her head. Tommy's not there anymore. You helped him move on, and I'm grateful for that. He can rest now, knowing that someone heard his calls and understood what happened. I still drive through that section of Tennessee regularly, and I always listen carefully to my CB radio when I pass the area where the old Blue Ridge No. 3 mine used to operate. But I've never heard Tommy Briggs's voice again, and other truckers report that the emergency calls from Blue Ridge Truck 47 stopped after November 15th, 2022. The mine entrance is still sealed, still posted with warning signs about the dangers of abandoned mining operations. But the flowers I saw that night are renewed every November 15th. 7 small bouquets placed by unknown hands to honor the miners who died trying to make a living in the dangerous business of extracting coal from Appalachian mountains. Sometimes I wonder how many other emergency calls are being transmitted from old mine sites throughout these mountains. How many miners died in accidents and are still trying to radio for help that will never come? How many safety coordinators like Tommy Briggs are stuck at their posts, unable to abandon their responsibilities even after death? The coal mining history of Appalachia is written in blood and tragedy. Thousands of men died in cave-ins, explosions, and equipment accidents over the decades when coal was king in these mountains. And if my experience with Tommy Briggs taught me anything, it's that some of those men are still down there, still trying to look out for their buddies, still hoping that someone will hear their calls and come to help. If you're ever driving through coal country late at night, and you hear emergency calls on your CB radio from mining companies that don't exist anymore, don't ignore them. Find a way to respond, even if you can't provide the help they're asking for. Because sometimes the most important thing you can do is just listen. Just acknowledge that you heard their call, that you understand what happened, and that their sacrifice wasn't forgotten. Tommy Briggs stayed at his post for 39 years after his death, trying to coordinate a rescue operation that was doomed from the start. But he couldn't rest until someone heard his calls and recognized what he had tried to do. And that's a lesson every trucker should remember. When someone calls for help on the radio, you answer, even if they're calling from beyond the grave. Because in these mountains, the dead don't always stay buried. And sometimes, the most important freight you can haul is a message of acknowledgement and peace to someone who's been waiting decades to hear it. My name is Obadiah Fletcher, and I've been hauling freight through these North Carolina mountains for 21 years. Done everything from furniture to farm equipment, never met a load I couldn't deliver, or a road I couldn't navigate. But what happened to me on Route 221 near Grandfather Mountain in January 2023 taught me that some addresses exist in places that shouldn't be possible, and some deliveries are meant for customers who aren't entirely human. The call came in on a Monday morning while I was having breakfast at a truck stop in Hickory. My dispatcher had a special delivery that needed to be handled with care. Antique furniture being moved from an estate sale to a private collector up in the mountains. The pay was exceptional, almost double my normal rate, and the only unusual requirement was that the delivery had to be completed before sunset on the same day. Customers real particular about timing, my dispatcher explained. Says the furniture needs to be in place before dark, something about proper climate conditions. You know how these antique collectors can be. Bunch of superstitions about how old stuff should be handled. The pickup went smooth enough. Estate sale company in Hickory had the pieces already crated and ready to load. Beautiful stuff. A Victorian bedroom set, dining room table and chairs, even what looked like a genuine 1800s armoire that took 4 men to get onto my trailer. The kind of furniture that would cost more than most people's cars if you bought it from the right dealer. But it was the delivery address that should have been my first warning that something wasn't right. The paperwork showed the destination as 1847 Shadowbrook Lane, Banner Elk, North Carolina. Simple enough, except when I put the address into my GPS, it came back with no results found. Tried 2 more GPS units and got the same response. Address doesn't exist. I called the customer directly, a man named Amos Blackthorne who answered on the first ring like he'd been waiting for my call. Mr. Blackthorne, this is Obadiah Fletcher with your furniture delivery. Having some trouble with the GPS finding your address. Can you give me better directions? His voice was cultured, educated, but with an undertone that made me think of old money and older secrets. Of course, Mr. Fletcher, the GPS systems don't recognize our property because it's quite remote, and the road isn't officially maintained by the county. From Banner Elk, take Highway 184 north for approximately 12 miles until you reach a stone bridge over Shadowbrook Creek. Just past the bridge, you'll see a dirt road leading up the mountainside with a wooden sign marked Private Property. That's our access road. How far up the mountain is your house? About 3 miles. The road is steep and narrow, but it's well maintained and perfectly safe for your truck. I have deliveries brought up regularly. I thanked him for the directions and started my journey toward Banner Elk. The route took me through some of the most beautiful mountain scenery in North Carolina. Rolling hills covered with pine and hardwood forest, valleys filled with morning mist, and distant peaks that looked like they'd been painted against the sky. But as I got higher into the mountains, the landscape began to feel different. More isolated, more primitive, like I was driving back through time as well as up the mountainside. The houses became fewer and farther between, and the ones I could see looked like they'd been built decades or even centuries earlier. I found the stone bridge exactly where Blackthorne had said it would be, an old structure that looked like it had been built with hand-cut stones sometime in the 1800s. The creek below was clear and fast-running, cutting through granite boulders and dense forest. And just past the bridge, almost hidden by overgrown vegetation, was the dirt road leading up the mountain. The wooden sign was there too, but it was so weathered and faded that I could barely make out the words, "Private Property." What struck me as odd was that there were no modern warning signs, no trespassing markers, no indications of security systems, nothing that suggested contemporary property management. The road up the mountain was exactly as Blackthorne had described. Steep, narrow, but well-maintained. Somebody had put significant work into keeping it in good condition, with proper drainage and regularly graded surface. But the deeper I went into the forest, the more isolated I felt. No power lines, no telephone poles, no indication that modern utilities reach this far up the mountain. After about 20 minutes of careful climbing, the road opened into a clearing where I got my first look at the Blackthorn property. What I saw took my breath away. It was a mansion. Not a big house or a fancy cabin, but a genuine antebellum mansion that looked like it had been transported intact from a Georgia plantation. 3 stories, white columns, wraparound porches, the whole 9 yards. The kind of house you'd expect to see in a historical district, not hidden away on a remote North Carolina mountainside. But the house looked perfect. Freshly painted, well-maintained, landscaped grounds that belonged in a magazine. Even more impressive was that it all looked original. No modern additions, no updated fixtures visible from the outside, nothing that suggested the house had been modified for contemporary living. A man was waiting for me on the front porch as I parked my truck near what appeared to be a carriage house that had been converted into a garage. He was tall, distinguished, maybe 60 years old, with silver hair and the kind of formal bearing that suggested old Southern aristocracy. He was dressed in a 3-piece suit that looked like it had been tailored specifically for him, and he carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Mr. Fletcher, I presume? Amos Blackthorn. Thank you for making the journey up our mountain." His handshake was firm and cold, despite the mild January weather. And when he spoke, I noticed that his accent wasn't quite modern Southern. There was something archaic about his pronunciation, like he was speaking a dialect that had been preserved from an earlier era. "Beautiful property, Mr. Blackthorn. How long has your family lived up here?" "The Blackthorns have occupied this land since 1847. The house was completed in 1852, just before the unpleasantness between the states. We've been very fortunate to maintain it in its original condition. The same numbers as his address on Shadowbrook Lane." Blackthorn supervised the unloading of the furniture with an attention to detail that bordered on obsessive. Each piece had to be positioned exactly where he specified, oriented in precise directions that seemed to follow some pattern I couldn't understand. The armoire went in what he called the master chamber, the bedroom set in the guest quarters, the dining room furniture arranged in a formal layout that looked like it was being prepared for a dinner party. What struck me as odd was the condition of the house's interior. Everything was period appropriate, down to the smallest details. Oil lamps instead of electric lighting, although I could see that electricity had been installed discreetly. Furniture that looked genuinely antique, not reproduction pieces. Even the wallpaper and carpet appeared to be original to the house's construction. "You're quite the collector, Mr. Blackthorn. This stuff looks museum quality." "The Blackthorn family has always believed in preserving the past, Mr. Fletcher. We find that modern conveniences, while occasionally necessary, tend to dilute the authentic experience of living in a historical home." As I moved the furniture into position, I began to notice details that made me increasingly uncomfortable. Family portraits on the walls showed people in period dress, but the faces looked remarkably similar to Amos Blackthorn himself. Not just family resemblances, but actual facial features that were nearly identical across what appeared to be several generations of paintings. More disturbing were the dates on some of the portraits. Several were marked with years in the 1800s, but the faces in the paintings looked exactly like the man who was supervising my delivery. Either the Blackthorn family had incredibly strong genetic consistency, or something else was going on. "That's quite a family resemblance in these portraits," I commented while positioning the dining room table. Blackthorn smiled, but the expression didn't reach his eyes. "The Blackthorn bloodline is remarkably pure, Mr. Fletcher. We've been very careful about maintaining our heritage." The delivery took most of the afternoon, partly because of Blackthorn's precise requirements, and partly because I kept getting distracted by the house itself. Every room was a perfect recreation of 1850s luxury. 4-poster beds with hand-sewn quilts, wardrobes filled with period clothing, even chamber pots and washing basins that appeared to be in regular use. But it was the library that really got my attention. Floor-to-ceiling shelves filled with books that looked genuinely old, not reproduction antiques. I could see volumes on subjects ranging from agriculture and medicine to what appeared to be more esoteric topics: folklore, spiritual practices, even some titles in languages I didn't recognize. "Impressive collection," I said, while maneuvering the armoire up the main staircase. "Knowledge is power, Mr. Fletcher, and power, properly preserved and applied, can overcome many of the limitations that most people accept as inevitable." There was something in his tone that made me think he wasn't just talking about book learning. By 4:30 p.m., all the furniture was in place and arranged to Blackthorn's satisfaction. He walked through each room, checking the positioning and orientation of every piece with what looked like a measuring tape and compass. Only when he was completely satisfied did he sign the delivery receipt. "Excellent work, Mr. Fletcher. The furniture's positioned perfectly for tonight's requirements." "Tonight's requirements?" "Oh, just a small family gathering. We have these events periodically to maintain our traditions and connections to the past." He paid me in cash, crisp $100 bills that looked and felt authentic but somehow seemed too clean, too perfect, like they'd never been circulated. And when I held them up to the light, I noticed that the serial numbers were all sequential, and the printing date was from 1963. "Mr. Blackthorn, these bills are almost 60 years old. They're probably worth more than face value to collectors. The Blackthorn family has always preferred dealing in traditional currency, Mr. Fletcher. We find that newer money carries influences that we prefer to avoid." I didn't understand what he meant, but the money was legal tender and I had bills to pay. I thanked him for the business and prepared to leave, but as I was walking back to my truck, I noticed something that stopped me cold. There were other vehicles parked behind the carriage house that I hadn't seen when I arrived. Not cars, but carriages. Horse-drawn carriages that looked like they'd just been polished and prepared for use. And standing near the carriages were several people in period dress, men in formal suits with top hats, women in elaborate gowns with parasols. They were all looking at me with expressions of polite interest, but there was something wrong with their faces. The features were sharp, almost predatory, and their eyes seemed to reflect light like an animal's eyes in headlights. "Mr. Blackthorn, are those people part of your family gathering?" He turned to look where I was pointing, and his smile became wider and less human. "Oh, yes, they're all family, Mr. Fletcher. Extended family, you might say. They've been looking forward to tonight's event for quite some time." I climbed into my truck quickly and started the engine, suddenly eager to get off the mountain before dark. But as I prepared to leave, Blackthorn approached my driver's side window. "Mr. Fletcher, you've done excellent work today. If you're ever in need of employment, the Blackthorn family occasionally requires transportation services for other projects. We pay very well for discretion and reliability." "What kind of transportation services?" "Oh, various things. Sometimes we need items moved from one location to another under specific timing requirements. Sometimes we need people brought to the property for business meetings. Always at night, of course, and always with the understanding that absolute confidentiality is required." Everything about the offer felt wrong, but the money had been good and I had truck payments to make. "I'll keep it in mind, Mr. Blackthorn." "Excellent. Here's my card. Call any time after sunset if you're interested." He handed me a business card that looked like it had been engraved rather than printed. Heavy paper stock, raised lettering, the kind of formal presentation that you'd expect from someone with serious money. But when I looked at the card more closely, I noticed that there was no phone number, no email address, no modern contact information at all. Just a name, Amos Blackthorne, and an address, 1847 Shadowbrook Lane, Banner Elk, North Carolina. I drove down the mountain as fast as I safely could, suddenly desperate to reach the main highway before darkness fell. But even driving at the maximum speed the narrow road would allow, it took almost 45 minutes to reach the stone bridge. And by the time I got there, the sun was setting behind the mountains. That's when I made the mistake of looking in my mirrors. There were lights on the mountain behind me. Not electric lights, but the warm, flickering glow of oil lamps and candles. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, scattered throughout the forest around the Blackthorne mansion. And moving between the lights, I could see figures in period dress, walking through the woods like they were attending some kind of outdoor ceremony. But what really made my skin crawl was the music. Even with my windows closed and my engine running, I could hear it. A waltz being played on what sounded like period instruments. Violin, piano, maybe a chamber orchestra performing music that belonged in a 19th century ballroom. The music grew louder as I watched, and the lights began to move in coordinated patterns, like the figures in the forest were dancing to the rhythm. Dancing in the woods around a mansion that shouldn't exist, at an address that wasn't on any map, attending a family gathering that had been going on for over a century. I floored the accelerator and didn't slow down until I reached the main highway and could see the normal lights of Banner Elk in the distance. But even then, I kept checking my mirrors, half expecting to see carriages following me down the mountain. That night, I called my dispatcher and reported that the delivery had been completed successfully. But when I tried to describe the location and customer, he acted confused. "Obadiah, I don't show any delivery to Banner Elk on your schedule. Your last load was furniture from Hickory to Charlotte, delivered yesterday afternoon." "No, the Blackthorne delivery. The antique furniture going up the mountain. Special delivery, double rate, had to be completed before sunset." "I don't have any record of that job, Obadiah, and we don't have any customers named Blackthorne in our system." I pulled out the paperwork from my truck, but when I opened the folder, it was empty. No bills of lading, no delivery receipts, no documentation that the job had ever existed. Even the business card Amos Blackthorne had given me was gone. But the money was real. 20 crisp $100 bills, all from 1963, all with sequential serial numbers. I deposited them at my bank the next morning, and they cleared without any problems. 3 weeks later, I received a phone call at home. The caller ID showed no number, just a series of dashes, and when I answered, I heard Amos Blackthorne's cultured voice. "Mr. Fletcher, I hope you've been well. We have another transportation requirement that might interest you. Same rates as before, same timing requirements." "Mr. Blackthorne, how did you get my home number?" "I don't recall giving it to you." "The Blackthorne family has access to extensive information networks, Mr. Fletcher. We make it our business to stay in touch with reliable service providers. What kind of transportation do you need?" "We need several people brought to our property for a business meeting. They'll be waiting at various locations in Boone, and they'll need to arrive at our house before midnight. Very simple work, very good pay." "What kind of business meeting happens after midnight?" "The kind that requires privacy and discretion, Mr. Fletcher. The kind that people like you are well compensated to facilitate without asking unnecessary questions." Every instinct I'd developed in 21 years of trucking was telling me to hang up the phone and forget I'd ever heard of Amos Blackthorne. But the money had been real, and I was behind on my truck payments. "How much are we talking about?" $5,000 cash. Same currency as before, same confidentiality requirements. $5,000 for one night's work. Enough to catch up on all my bills and have money left over for truck maintenance. Mr. Blackthorne, I need to think about it. And opportunities like this don't wait for indecision. He hung up before I could ask any more questions. I spent the next 2 days researching everything I could find about the Blackthorne family and their property on Shadowbrook Lane. What I discovered made me wish I'd never made that delivery. There was no record of any current property ownership under the name Blackthorne in Avery County. No tax records, no deed filings, no utilities connected to any address on Shadowbrook Lane. According to official records, that section of mountain was undeveloped forest land owned by the state. But there were historical records dating back to the 1800s. A plantation owner named Amos Blackthorne had indeed owned a large tract of land in that area, and he had built a mansion there in 1852. But Amos Blackthorne had disappeared in 1863 during the Civil War, and his property had eventually reverted to the state when no heirs could be located. Most disturbing were the local folklore records I found at the Appalachian State University Library. Stories passed down through generations of mountain families about strange lights and music heard from the old Blackthorne property, especially during the winter months. Tales of people who went up the mountain looking for the abandoned mansion and were never seen again. And according to several accounts from the 1920s and 1930s, local residents occasionally reported seeing a man who looked exactly like the original Amos Blackthorne, driving carriages through Banner Elk and recruiting people for business opportunities that required travel to remote mountain properties. The people who went with him were never seen again. I made my decision that night. When Blackthorne called back at exactly midnight, I was ready for him. "Mr. Fletcher, have you considered our transportation opportunity?" "I have, Mr. Blackthorne, and I'm going to pass." Long silence on the phone. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. Still cultured, still polite, but with an undertone of menace that made my blood run cold. "I'm disappointed, Mr. Fletcher. The Blackthorne family values loyalty in our business relationships. People who help us prosper. People who disappoint us, well, they tend to find that mountain roads can be very dangerous, especially at night. Is that a threat, Mr. Blackthorne?" "It's simply an observation about the realities of driving in Appalachian terrain, Mr. Fletcher. Accidents happen. People disappear. Sometimes their trucks are found months later at the bottom of ravines, and sometimes they're never found at all." I hung up on him and immediately called the Avery County Sheriff's Department to report the threatening phone call. But when the deputies investigated, they found no evidence that anyone named Blackthorne owned property in the area, and no record of the address I'd delivered to. That was 8 months ago. I've changed my route patterns to avoid Banner Elk and the surrounding mountain areas, even though it costs me money to take longer roads. I've also installed a dash cam system and GPS tracking in my truck, and I carry a satellite communicator that can summon help even in areas with no cell coverage. But every few weeks, I get phone calls at strange hours. Always the same caller ID showing dashes instead of numbers. Always the same cultured voice offering transportation opportunities that pay exceptional money for night work in remote mountain locations. I never answer those calls anymore. But I know other truckers who might not be as careful. Other drivers who need money badly enough to take jobs without asking too many questions. If you are ever offered a delivery to an address that doesn't show up on GPS, especially if the customer insists on specific timing requirements and pays in old currency, think twice before accepting the job. And if you do take it, make sure someone knows where you're going and when you're supposed to be back. Because some addresses exist in places that aren't entirely part of our world. And some customers aren't entirely human, no matter how normal they appear on the surface. The Blackthorn Mansion may not exist on any official map, but it's real enough for the people who find themselves driving up that mountain road, and once you've made a delivery there, you become part of their network whether you want to or not. That antique furniture I delivered wasn't just being moved to a new location. It was being positioned for ceremonies and gatherings that have been going on since 1847. Events that require specific props and arrangements to maintain connections between the world of the living and whatever else exists in those remote mountain hollows. And they're always looking for new participants, people who can be recruited with promises of easy money and simple transportation jobs. Just remember, if the address doesn't exist on any map, there's probably a reason for that, and some deliveries are meant to be your last. Name's Amos Dalton. Been driving for Cumberland Valley Transport out of Bristol, Tennessee for 12 years now. CVT's a good outfit, family-owned, treats their drivers right, maintains their equipment proper. What I'm about to tell you happened on Interstate 81 through Virginia in September 2022, and it made me question everything I thought I knew about death, duty, and what happens to truckers who can't let go of the road. I was running a load of manufacturing equipment from Johnson City, Tennessee up to Winchester, Virginia. A standard overnight haul, nothing unusual about the cargo or route. I-81 through the Shenandoah Valley, one of the prettiest drives in the country when the weather's clear and the traffic's moving. But that Tuesday night we had fog. Dense, thick fog that rolled in from the mountains just after sunset and reduced visibility to maybe 50 yards. The kind of fog that makes smart drivers pull over and wait it out, but I was already running late due to a delay at the shipper, and my delivery window was tight. Around 11:30 p.m., just north of Staunton, I caught up to another CVT truck running the same direction. Same company colors, same fleet number format, maintaining about 45 miles per hour in the right lane with flashers on. Safe driving for the conditions, exactly what company policy required. I keyed my CB radio to make contact. CVT truck northbound near mile marker 235. This is CVT 847 coming up behind you. How's the road looking ahead? The response came back immediately, clear as day despite the atmospheric conditions that usually interfere with radio transmission. CVT 847, this is CVT 731. Roads getting thicker up ahead, but it's manageable if you keep your speed down and stay in the right lane. Been running this route for 15 years. Know every mile of it by heart. CVT 731. I knew that truck number because it belonged to Hiram Blackwood, one of our most experienced drivers. Hiram had been with the company for over 20 years, knew these mountain roads better than anyone. He was exactly the kind of driver you'd want to follow through dangerous conditions. Thanks for the heads up, 731. Mind if I stay behind you until this fog lifts? No problem, 847. Just maintain following distance and we'll get through this together. That's what CVT drivers do. Look out for each other. I settled in about a quarter mile behind Hiram's truck and followed his pace through the fog. His driving was perfect. Smooth acceleration and braking, proper lane positioning, steady speed that kept us moving without creating dangerous situations. The kind of professional driving that comes from decades of experience. We ran together for about an hour, making steady progress through the worst fog I'd encountered in years. Hiram would occasionally update me on road conditions ahead, construction zones, on-ramps where cars might be merging, hills and curves that required extra caution. His knowledge of the route was encyclopedic, like he'd memorized every detail of Interstate 81 through Virginia. CVT 847. We're coming up on the Harrisonburg area. Watch for cars merging from Route 33. They don't always see trucks in these conditions. Copy that, 731. Appreciate you running point through this soup. Like I said, 847, CVT drivers look out for each other. Been doing this run twice a week for 15 years, and I've never lost a truck to weather conditions. Around 1:30 a.m., the fog started to thin out enough that I could see the reflective tape on the back of Hiram's trailer more clearly. CVT 731 was painted in our standard fleet colors: blue cab, white trailer, company logo displayed properly. Everything looked normal and regulation compliant. But as the visibility improved, I began to notice details that didn't seem quite right. The truck looked older than most of our fleet equipment. The cab style was from maybe 10 years ago, the kind CVT had been phasing out in favor of more fuel-efficient models. And the trailer configuration was different from our current standard, with older style reflective markings and DOT numbers that didn't match our current format. CVT 731, what model truck are you running? Cab looks like one of the older Kenworths. 2012 Kenworth T 800, 847. Still runs good as the day I bought her. Company lets me keep driving her because I maintain her properly and know all her quirks. That made sense. CVT did allow some drivers to stay with older trucks if they had good maintenance records and strong performance ratings. Hiram was exactly the kind of driver who would earn that privilege. As we approached Strasbourg, the fog finally began to clear enough that I could see the surrounding landscape. Rolling hills, scattered farmhouses, the familiar landmarks of the northern Shenandoah Valley. But something about the scene felt wrong, like I was looking at it through a filter that changed the colors and depth. CVT 731. Visibility's improving. How much farther to Winchester? About 45 minutes at our current speed, 847. We'll drop down through the gap and hit the Winchester area right on schedule. But when I checked my GPS and compared it to Hiram's estimate, the timing didn't match. According to my navigation system, we were still over an hour from Winchester, even accounting for the slower speed we'd been maintaining in the fog. CVT 731, my GPS shows we're still pretty far from Winchester. You sure about that 45-minute estimate? Long pause on the radio. When Hiram's voice came back, it sounded different. More distant, with a quality that reminded me of old recordings. GPS doesn't always account for local shortcuts, 847. I've been running this route so long I know ways to save time that aren't on the electronic maps. Trust me, we'll make good time from here. The fog continued to thin, and I could see more clearly now. But what I saw made my blood run cold. The landscape around us wasn't right for our location on I-81. The hills were steeper, the valleys deeper, and the highway itself seemed narrower than it should be. More disturbing was the complete absence of other traffic. For over 2 hours, I hadn't seen a single other vehicle on what should be a busy interstate highway. No cars, no other trucks, not even any state police or DOT enforcement. It was as if Hiram and I were the only people on the road. CVT 731, have you noticed we haven't seen any other traffic tonight? Traffic's light on this route during the week, 847. Most drivers take I-95 or I-77. That's why I prefer this way. Fewer distractions, better fuel economy, less stress. But I-81 was never completely empty, even in the middle of the night. There should have been some traffic, especially freight movements between the Mid-Atlantic and the Southeast. Around 2:45 a.m., we passed a highway sign that made me question my own navigation skills. According to the sign, we were approaching Front Royal, which was significantly south of our intended route to Winchester. Either we had somehow gotten turned around, or the highway system wasn't laid out the way I remembered it. CVT 731, are you sure we're on the right route? That sign showed Front Royal, which should be south of Winchester. Routes change over time, 847. Road construction, new interchanges, updated highway designations. I've seen this road evolve for 15 years. Sometimes the old ways are better than the new ways. I tried calling CVT dispatch to verify our location and get updated routing information, but my cell phone showed no signal. Not unusual in some mountain areas, but we should have been in range of multiple towers by now. My CB radio was working fine for communication with Hiram, but when I tried to reach other truckers or monitor Channel 19 for traffic information, all I got was static. It was as if the only functioning radio frequency was the one connecting me to CVT 731. That's when I decided to do something that probably saved my life. I called CVT dispatch using my truck's satellite communication system, which should work anywhere in North America regardless of cellular coverage. The response I got made my hands shake on the steering wheel. CVT 847, this is dispatch. We show you running alone on Interstate 81 northbound, about 30 miles south of Winchester. There are no other CVT trucks in your area, and we don't have any scheduled runs that would put CVT 731 on that route tonight. Dispatch, I've been following CVT 731 for over 3 hours. Driver identifies as Hiram Blackwood, says he's been running this route for 15 years. Long pause. When the dispatcher came back on, his voice was carefully controlled. CVT 847, we need you to pull over at the next safe location and call us immediately on your cell phone. Do not attempt to make contact with the other truck until you've talked to us. Dispatch, why? What's wrong? Just pull over 847 right now. This is a safety issue. I took the next exit and pulled into a truck stop parking lot. But when I looked around for CVT 731, it was nowhere to be seen. The truck that had been running ahead of me for 3 hours had simply vanished, as if it had never existed. My cell phone had full signal strength as soon as I stopped, and I called CVT dispatch immediately. What they told me made everything fall into place in the most horrifying way possible. Amos, Hiram Blackwood, died in a truck accident 3 months ago. Single vehicle rollover on I-81 near Strasburg during a foggy night, exactly the kind of conditions you described. CVT 731 was totaled in the accident, and we retired the fleet number out of respect. Hiram Blackwood was dead. Had been dead for 3 months. But I had been following his truck, listening to his voice on the radio, relying on his experience to guide me through dangerous driving conditions. How is that possible? I was talking to him for hours. He knew details about the route, about company policies, about other drivers. Amos, we don't know how it's possible, but you're not the first driver to report this. 3 other CVT trucks have reported following 731 through fog on I-81, always at night, always during dangerous weather conditions. What happened to those drivers? 2 of them completed their run safely, just like you did, but the 3rd driver, he was found the next morning at the bottom of a ravine near Strasburg, same location where Hiram had his accident. The dispatcher went on to explain that CVT had been quietly investigating these reports for months, trying to understand how multiple drivers could have identical experiences involving a truck and driver that no longer existed. They'd consulted with psychologists, paranormal investigators, even local historians trying to find some rational explanation. But the pattern was consistent. CVT drivers traveling alone on I-81 through Virginia during foggy conditions would encounter Hiram Blackwood's truck and receive guidance through the dangerous weather. Most of them made it safely to their destinations, but at least one had followed Hiram's guidance right off the road and into the same ravine where Hiram himself had died. Why didn't you warn us about this? We tried putting out a fleet bulletin, but drivers thought we were telling ghost stories. And honestly, most of the encounters have positive outcomes. Hiram seems to be trying to help other CVT drivers navigate safely through the same conditions that killed him, but not always successfully. And therein lay the horror of the situation. I completed my delivery to Winchester and returned to Tennessee, but I couldn't stop thinking about my experience with Hiram Blackwood's ghost. The man had died trying to do his job safely, and somehow his spirit was still out there, still trying to help other drivers, still running the same route he'd driven for 15 years. But death had taken away his ability to judge distances, road conditions, and navigation accurately. He was operating on memories and instincts that were no longer reliable, giving guidance that might help some drivers but could lead others to the same fate he'd suffered. 3 weeks later, I was assigned another run on I-81 through Virginia. Different route, daytime hours, clear weather conditions. But as I approached the area where I'd encountered Hiram, I decided to monitor CB Channel 19 and listen for any unusual transmissions. What I heard made my blood run cold. Another CVT driver was reporting contact with 731, asking for guidance through fog that had just rolled in near Strasburg. The same area where Hiram had died, the same conditions that had killed him 3 months earlier. I immediately called CVT dispatch and reported the transmission. They contacted the driver by satellite phone and directed him to pull over at the next safe location, just as they had done with me. That driver made it safely off the highway before following Hiram's guidance into the ravine. But according to dispatch, similar encounters were being reported every few weeks, always during foggy conditions, always in the same general area of Interstate 81 through Virginia. Hiram Blackwood was trapped in an endless loop, trying to complete runs that would never end, offering help to drivers who might not survive his assistance. And CVT management was faced with an impossible situation. How do you retire a driver who's already dead but won't stop working? The solution they finally implemented was both practical and heartbreaking. CVT issued a fleet-wide bulletin with specific instructions for any driver who encountered 731 on the radio. Acknowledge the contact politely, thank Hiram for his concern, but do not follow his routing suggestions or attempt to stay with his truck. Most importantly, any driver who made contact with 731 was to immediately report their location to dispatch and request guidance from living supervisors who could provide accurate, current routing information. Hiram's trying to help, the bulletin explained, but he's operating on information that's no longer current, and his judgment has been affected by his circumstances. Treat him with respect, but don't trust his guidance. 6 months later, the encounters began to decrease in frequency. Whether Hiram finally understood that his help was sometimes dangerous, or whether he found some other way to fulfill his sense of duty to fellow drivers, no one knows. But occasionally, CVT drivers still report hearing his voice on the radio during foggy nights on E81. Usually just a brief transmission. Stay safe out there, driver, or watch your following distance in these conditions before the frequency goes silent again. Hiram Blackwood spent 15 years keeping other drivers safe on that stretch of highway. Death ended his career, but it didn't end his commitment to the trucking community. He's still out there somewhere, still trying to help, still running routes through the fog-covered mountains of Virginia. The difference now is that we know to be careful about following guidance from drivers who are no longer among the living, because sometimes the most dangerous help comes from people who care too much to let go of their responsibilities, even after those responsibilities have been permanently ended by circumstances beyond their control. If you're ever driving through fog on I-81 in Virginia, and you hear a voice on the radio identifying as CVT-731, treat Hiram with the respect he deserves. Thank him for his concern, acknowledge his experience, but make your own decisions about route and safety. Because the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and sometimes the most well-meaning guidance can lead you right off the highway and into the same darkness that claimed the person trying to help you. Hiram Blackwood was a good driver, a dedicated professional, and a man who cared about his fellow truckers. Death didn't change any of those qualities, but death did change his ability to judge what constitutes safe driving advice. And that's a distinction that could mean the difference between completing your run safely and joining Hiram in his eternal journey through the fog-covered mountains of Virginia. The name's Cletus Harmon. Been hauling freight through these West Virginia hills for 16 years now. Mostly run furniture and appliances from manufacturers down in North Carolina up to distribution centers in Ohio and Pennsylvania. It's honest work, pays decent, and keeps me on roads I know like the back of my hand. But what happened to me at the Kanawha River Rest area in April 2023 made me realize that some families never really finish their vacations, and some rest stops serve travelers from decades that ain't supposed to exist anymore. I was running a load of bedroom furniture from High Point, North Carolina, up to a warehouse in Columbus, Ohio. Standard 2-day run that I'd done maybe 30 times over the years. Take US 52 north through West Virginia, catch I-64 west toward Charleston, then head north on I-77. Good roads, decent truck stops, and usually smooth sailing unless you hit construction or weather. It was around 6:30 p.m. on a Thursday when I pulled into the Kanawha River Rest area, about 20 miles east of Charleston. Nothing fancy, just a basic interstate rest stop with picnic tables, vending machines, restrooms, and a dog walking area. The kind of place where truckers grab a quick break and families let their kids stretch their legs. I parked in the truck section and did my standard routine. Checked the load straps, filled out my logbook, grabbed a soda from the vending machine. The rest area wasn't crowded, maybe half a dozen cars in the regular parking area, and one other truck besides mine. That's when I noticed the family having their picnic. They were set up at one of the concrete tables near the edge of the parking area, spread out with what looked like a full-scale family dinner. Mom, Dad, 3 kids ranging from maybe 8 to 15 years old, all dressed like they were heading to church or some other special occasion. The kind of formal family outing you used to see more often back in the day. What caught my attention first was how well dressed they were. The father was wearing a suit with a narrow tie. The mother had on a dress with a pattern that looked like something from an old magazine. And the kids were in clothes that seemed too formal for a roadside picnic. But they looked happy, talking and laughing like families do when they're enjoying time together. I walked over to use the restrooms, and as I passed their table, the father looked up and gave me a friendly nod. "Beautiful evening for traveling," he said. "You heading far?" "Columbus, Ohio," I replied. "How about y'all? Taking a vacation?" "Oh yes," the mother chimed in. "We're driving up to visit my sister in Pennsylvania. Haven't seen her in, goodness, it must be almost 10 years now. The children are so excited." The kids looked up from their food and smiled politely. Well-behaved children, the kind you don't see much anymore. Sitting properly, eating with good manners, listening to their parents instead of staring at phones or electronic devices. "That's nice," I said. "Y'all have a safe trip." "You too," the father replied. "Roads can be dangerous at night, especially for truck drivers. You be careful out there." I continued to the restroom, thinking what a pleasant family they seemed to be. In an age when most people barely acknowledge strangers, it was refreshing to meet folks who still believed in common courtesy and friendly conversation. But when I came back from the restroom about 10 minutes later, something about the scene struck me as unusual. The family was still eating their picnic dinner, but they hadn't made any progress with their meal. The food on their plates looked exactly the same as when I'd first seen them. Same portions, same arrangement, like they'd been frozen in time while I was gone. More striking was their car. It was parked about 30 yards from their picnic table, and in the better light of the parking lot, I could see that it was a vintage station wagon. Not a restored classic that someone might drive for fun, but an actual period car that looked like it had been driven off a 1970s car lot yesterday. Wood paneling on the sides, the distinctive chrome trim and body style that Detroit used to produce. Even the license plates looked like the old format West Virginia used to issue decades ago. But the car was in perfect condition. No rust, no faded paint, no signs of age that you'd expect from a vehicle that old. I walked back to my truck, but something made me turn around and take another look at the family. That's when I noticed details that made my skin crawl. Their clothes weren't just formal and old-fashioned. They were specifically styled like clothing from the 1970s. The father's suit had the wide lapels and earth-tone colors that were popular back then. The mother's dress had the pattern and cut that you'd see in old photographs from that era. Even the children's outfits looked like something from a vintage clothing catalog, but it wasn't like they were dressed up for a theme party or historical event. They were wearing these clothes like they were normal, contemporary attire. I decided to get a closer look at their car, walking casually in that direction like I was heading to the vending machines. When I got close enough to read the license plate clearly, my blood turned to ice water. The plate was a West Virginia issue from 1973. Not a vanity plate or a collectible recreation, but an actual 1973 registration that looked like it had just been renewed at the DMV. The car itself was a 1972 Ford Country Squire station wagon, the kind of family vehicle that was popular in the early 70s. But this one looked showroom new. Perfect paint, pristine interior visible through the windows. Even the tires looked like they'd just been installed. I walked back toward the family's picnic table, trying to get a better look at them without being obvious about it. But as I got closer, I realized they weren't just dressed like people from 1973, they were actually having a conversation that sounded like it was from 1973. "I hope Sister Mary has that new color television she wrote about," the mother was saying. "The children would love to see their programs in color." "Gas prices are getting so high," the father replied. 45 cents a gallon at the last station we stopped at. "At this rate, vacation trips are going to be a luxury we can't afford." They were talking about gas prices and color televisions like these were new developments, current concerns that any family might discuss during a 1970s road trip. But it was 2023, and their conversation made no sense in the context of modern reality. I approached their table again, this time with specific questions in mind. "Excuse me, folks. I couldn't help but notice your beautiful car. Is that a 72 Country Squire?" The father beamed with pride. 1972. Ford Country Squire Ltd. Bought her new last spring. Best family car Ford ever made, in my opinion. Bought her new last spring. In 1972, which would have been over 50 years ago. "What year is it?" I asked, trying to sound casual. The family looked at me like I'd asked the strangest question in the world. The mother smiled indulgently, like I might be a little slow. "Why, it's 1973, of course. April 15th, 1973. We're taking our Easter vacation to visit family in Pennsylvania. April 15th, 1973. 50 years ago to the day." "What do you know about current events?" I pressed. "Who's the president?" "President Nixon, naturally," the father replied. "Though, with all this Watergate business in the news, who knows how long that'll last." They were living in 1973, completely unaware that 50 years had passed. discussing current events from half a century ago as if they were happening today, driving a car that should have been scrapped decades earlier, wearing clothes that should have been donated to vintage stores. I excused myself and walked back to my truck, trying to process what I was experiencing. Either I was having some kind of breakdown, or I had encountered a family that was somehow trapped in time, endlessly repeating the same road trip from 1973. I decided to test my theory by taking a photograph with my phone. If they were really from 1973, they might not understand what a smartphone camera was, or react in ways that would confirm they weren't part of the modern world. I walked back toward their table, holding my phone casually, and asked if I could take their picture. "Oh, how wonderful!" the mother exclaimed. "Children, the nice truck driver wants to take our photograph. Sit up straight and smile." They posed for the picture like families did in the 1970s. Formal, arranged, everyone looking directly at the camera with genuine smiles. But when I looked at the photo on my phone screen, what I saw made my hands shake. The family was there in the image, exactly as I'd seen them, but their clothing, their hairstyles, even their faces looked like something from a faded color photograph from decades ago. The image quality was different too, not the sharp, high-definition quality of a modern digital photo, but the slightly muted, grainy appearance of 1970s color photography. Most disturbing of all, the timestamp on the photo showed April 15th, 2023, but the visual quality and style of the image suggested it had been taken 50 years earlier. "Could you mail us a copy of that photograph?" the father asked. "We'd love to have it for our family album." He handed me a business card with his name and address. The card was printed in the style popular in the early 1970s, with his name, Robert P. Morrison, and an address in Charleston, West Virginia. But when I looked closely at the card, the printing looked fresh, like it had just been made. "I'll see what I can do," I told him, pocketing the card. I spent another 20 minutes observing the Morrison family, asking casual questions and listening to their conversation. Everything they said, everything they did was consistent with a family traveling in 1973. They discussed gas prices, television programs, and political events from that era as current topics. They talked about relatives they were planning to visit, using present tense for people who were probably dead by now. Most unsettling was their complete comfort with their situation. They weren't confused or disoriented. They weren't acting like people who had been displaced in time or were experiencing something supernatural. To them, this was a normal family vacation in 1973, and everything around them made perfect sense. As the sun began to set, the family started packing up their picnic. They moved with the same unhurried, methodical approach that characterized everything they did, carefully storing their leftovers and cleaning their table. "We should be getting back on the road," Robert Morrison told his wife. "Want to reach Beckley before it gets too dark." Beckley was south of our current location. If they were traveling from West Virginia to Pennsylvania, they were heading in the wrong direction. "Mr. Morrison, I think Beckley is back the way you came. Pennsylvania would be north and east from here." He looked at me with polite confusion. "Oh no, we're taking the scenic route through southern West Virginia. My wife's always wanted to see the New River Gorge, and the children love mountain driving. The New River Gorge Bridge, the area's most famous landmark, wasn't completed until 1977. In 1973, it didn't exist yet. But the Morrison family climbed into their perfect 1972 station wagon and drove south toward Beckley, their taillights disappearing into the gathering darkness like they were heading back into 1973. I completed my trip to Columbus and returned to North Carolina, but I couldn't stop thinking about the Morrison family. When I got home, I researched the address on Robert Morrison's business card. What I found confirmed my worst fears and raised questions I couldn't answer. Robert P. Morrison had lived at that Charleston address from 1968 to 1973. He was an insurance salesman, married to Patricia Morrison, father of 3 children named David, Susan, and Michael. The family had disappeared on April 15, 1973, while driving to Pennsylvania to visit Patricia's sister. Their 1972 Ford Country Squire station wagon was found a week later at the bottom of a ravine near the New River, about 50 miles south of the Kanawha River Rest area. All 5 family members were dead, killed instantly when their car went off the road during a severe thunderstorm. The accident had made local news because the family had been driving south toward Beckley instead of north toward Pennsylvania, apparently lost or confused about their route. The investigation concluded that Robert Morrison had taken a wrong turn somewhere and had been trying to find his way back to the interstate when the accident occurred. But according to the newspaper accounts, the Morrison family had been found in their car at the bottom of the ravine on April 22, 1973. They had been dead for a week. Yet I had talked to them, shared conversation with them, even taken their photograph on April 15, 2023. Exactly 50 years after they had started their final road trip. I tried to dismiss my experience as some kind of hallucination or stress-related episode, but the photograph was real, stored in my phone's memory with a timestamp that proved the encounter had actually happened. 3 weeks later, I had another delivery that took me through West Virginia on a 64. I made a point of stopping at the Kanawha River Rest area again, hoping to find some rational explanation for what I had experienced. The rest area looked completely normal, typical interstate facilities with modern amenities and current safety features. But when I walked to the picnic table where the Morrison family had been eating their dinner, I found something that made my blood run cold. There were 5 place settings on the table. Paper plates, plastic utensils, napkins, and cups arranged exactly as they had been during my first encounter with the family. But the settings were faded and weathered, like they'd been sitting there exposed to the elements for decades. Under one of the plates, I found a note written in neat handwriting that looked like a child's school assignment. "Thank you for taking our picture, Mr. Truck Driver. We hope you have safe travels. Susan Morrison." I looked around the rest area, but there was no sign of the Morrison family or their station wagon. Just me, an empty rest area, and 5 place settings that shouldn't exist for a family that had been dead for 50 years. That evening, I called the West Virginia Department of Highways to ask about the history of the Kanawha River Rest area. What the maintenance supervisor told me added another layer to the mystery. The rest area had been built in 1969, which meant it had been open when the Morrison family made their fatal trip in 1973. But according to maintenance records, the facility had been upgraded and modernized several times over the years, with the most recent renovation completed in 2018. Funny thing, though, the supervisor mentioned. Every few years we get reports from travelers about seeing a 1970s family having picnics at that rest area. Always the same description. Father in a suit, mother in a dress, 3 well-behaved children, vintage station wagon. Usually happens in April, around tax day. What do you make of those reports? Well, officially we don't make anything of them. But I've worked highway maintenance for 30 years, and I've learned that some places hold on to their memories longer than others. That stretch of Interstate 64 has seen a lot of travelers over the decades, and maybe some of them never really finished their journeys. 6 months later, I received a package in the mail with no return address. Inside was a 5x7 color photograph that looked like it had been developed at a 1970s photo processing lab. The image showed the Morrison family posed at their picnic table, exactly as I remembered them, but with one addition. I was in the photograph too, standing slightly behind their table with my phone in my hand. But in the photo, I looked different. My clothes, my hairstyle, even the truck visible in the background had the appearance of something from the 1970s. It was as if the photograph had captured us all in the same time period, merging 2023 with 1973 in a way that created a single, impossible image. On the back of the photograph, written in the same neat handwriting I'd seen at the rest area, was a message. "Thank you for visiting with us during our vacation. We hope you'll stop and say hello again if you're ever traveling through West Virginia in April. The Morrison family, Easter, 1973. I keep that photograph in my logbook now, and I've shown it to other drivers who run routes through West Virginia. Most of them just see a normal family photo from the 1970s. Nothing unusual or supernatural about it. But a few drivers, the ones who've been running these mountain roads for decades, look at the photo and nod knowingly. "Oh yeah," they'll say. "I've seen them too. Nice family. Always polite, always traveling to visit relatives in Pennsylvania. Been making that same trip for as long as I can remember." The Morrison family never reached their destination in 1973, but they're still trying to complete their journey. Every April, on the anniversary of their departure, they stop at the Kanawha River Rest Area to have their picnic dinner, still dressed in their Easter best, still excited about visiting relatives they'll never reach. And sometimes, if you're traveling through West Virginia at the right time of year, you might encounter them yourself. If you do, stop and say hello. They're friendly people who enjoy meeting travelers, and they're always interested in hearing about current road conditions and the best routes to Pennsylvania. Just don't try to give them directions. They've been making this trip for 50 years now, and they're convinced they know the way. Even if the way they're going leads to a ravine near the New River and a destination they'll never reach. Because some families never really finish their vacations, and some rest stops serve travelers from every decade that ever passed through. The Morrison family is still out there, still traveling, still hoping to complete their 1973 Easter trip to Pennsylvania. And they'll keep trying until someone can show them the road that leads not to their destination, but to whatever comes after the journey ends. My name's Beulah Whitmore, and I've been driving these Kentucky back roads for 13 years now. Most folks think women can't handle big rigs through mountain terrain, but I've proven them wrong time and again. I run specialty loads, oversized equipment, construction machinery, things that need careful handling, and routes that avoid the interstate restrictions. It's challenging work that keeps me on roads most truckers never see, through hollers and ridges that haven't changed much since my granddaddy's time. What happened to me on Route 23 between Prestonsburg and Paintsville in December 2022 taught me that some folks never really stop working, even after they've been missing for decades. And sometimes the help you need most comes from people who ain't supposed to be there anymore. I was hauling a piece of mining equipment from a manufacturer in Virginia down to a strip mining operation near Hazard. Big, heavy load that required special permits and routing through back roads to avoid weight restrictions and low bridges on the main highways. The kind of haul that pays real good money but tests every skill you've developed as a professional driver. The route took me through some of the most isolated parts of eastern Kentucky. Narrow mountain roads that wind through coal country, past abandoned mines and forgotten settlements where families used to make their living pulling black gold out of the earth. Beautiful country if you appreciate mountain scenery, but lonely as hell when you're the only vehicle for miles in any direction. It was around 4:30 in the afternoon, still had maybe an hour of daylight left, when I felt the steering wheel start to pull to the right. Any experienced driver knows that feeling. Tire going soft, getting ready to blow if you don't address it quick. I managed to nurse the truck to a wide spot in the road near an old bridge over Beaver Creek, shut her down, and climbed out to assess the situation. Sure enough, my right front steer tire had picked up a piece of metal. Looked like part of an old mining cable or chain that had punctured the sidewall clean through. Not the kind of damage you can fix with a plug or patch. I was going to need a complete tire replacement, and I was at least 20 miles from the nearest truck stop or service center. I tried my cell phone first, but no surprise, no signal. These mountain hollers are notorious for poor coverage, especially the deeper you get into coal country. My CB radio wasn't picking up any traffic either, just the usual static and occasional skip you get in mountainous terrain. I was starting to think I might have to unhook my trailer and bobtail back to Prestonsburg for help when I saw headlights approaching from the south. Old pickup truck, moving slow and steady like the driver knew these roads well. As it got closer, I could see it was a work truck. Toolboxes in the bed, equipment racks, the kind of vehicle a mechanic or maintenance worker might drive. The truck pulled over about 50 yards behind my rig, and a man climbed out. He was maybe 50 years old, wearing work clothes that had seen better days. Faded coveralls, steel-toed boots, baseball cap with the logo of some company I didn't recognize. He had the bearing of someone who'd spent his life working with his hands, fixing things that other people couldn't repair. "Looks like you got yourself some tire trouble," he called out as he walked toward my truck. "Yes, sir. Punctured sidewall on my steer tire. You wouldn't happen to know where I might find help around here, would you?" He walked over and examined the damaged tire, running his hands along the sidewall and checking the extent of the damage. His inspection was thorough and professional, the kind of evaluation you'd expect from someone who really understood truck maintenance. "That's a bad one," he said. "Sidewall damage like that, you ain't gonna patch it. Need a complete replacement." That's what I figured. Problem is, I don't know how I'm gonna get a new tire out here. Nearest truck stop's gotta be 20 miles away, and I doubt they make deliveries this far into the hollers. He smiled, the kind of confident expression mechanics get when they know they can solve a problem that looks impossible to everyone else. "Name's Mavis Crenshaw," he said, extending a grease-stained hand. "I run a mobile tire service through these parts. Got a truck with everything needed to change out commercial tires right here on the roadside. Been helping stranded drivers for, must be going on 25 years now." 25 years? That was a long time to be running mobile service in such isolated territory, but I wasn't about to question good luck when it showed up in the form of professional help. Beulah Whitmore. I sure would appreciate any assistance you can provide. What's something like this gonna cost me? Don't worry about money right now. Let's get you back on the road first. Then we can settle up. Mavis walked back to his pickup and returned with a service truck that looked like it had been modified specifically for roadside tire changes. Heavy-duty jack, air tools, a full selection of commercial truck tires mounted on a rack system. The equipment was older but well-maintained, the kind of setup that an experienced mechanic accumulates over decades of mobile service work. "You carry that many different tire sizes?" I asked as he started positioning his jack. "After 25 years, you learn to stock what drivers need most. This section of road, I probably change 3 or 4 tires a week. Mining equipment, logging trucks, folks like yourself hauling specialty loads through the mountains." He worked with the efficiency of someone who'd done this job thousands of times. Got my truck jacked up, removed the damaged tire, and mounted a new one in less than 30 minutes. The replacement tire was the exact size I needed, properly balanced, even had the right load rating for my gross vehicle weight. "That's some impressive service," I told him as he lowered the jack. "How'd you manage to have exactly the right tire in stock?" "Experience," he said with that same confident smile. After a while, you develop a sixth sense about what drivers are going to need before they need it. As he packed up his equipment, I noticed details about Mavis that seemed unusual for a roadside mechanic working in 2022. His coveralls were clean but old style, the kind with snaps instead of zippers. His tools were high quality but vintage, older brands that had been popular decades ago but weren't commonly used anymore. Most striking was his pickup truck. It was a well-maintained Ford F-250 from what looked like the early 2000s, but it was in better condition than any 20-year-old work truck had a right to be. No rust, no dents. Paint that looked almost new despite obvious heavy use. Been working these roads for 25 years, you said. You must know every driver who runs through here regularly. Oh yes, I know all the regulars. Coal haulers, logging trucks, construction equipment like yourself. It's a small community out here in the hollers. We all look out for each other. You ever work on trucks for Cumberland Mining? They got operations all through this area. His expression changed slightly, became more distant. Used to do a lot of work for Cumberland. Good company, treated their drivers right. But they shut down their operations around here. Must be going on 20 years now. Haven't seen their trucks through these parts since. Cumberland Mining had indeed shut down their eastern Kentucky operations, but it had been exactly 21 years ago. The company had closed suddenly after a mining accident that killed several workers and resulted in major safety violations. Their equipment had been sold off, their facilities abandoned, and their truck drivers had scattered to other companies or left the industry entirely. What happened to Cumberland's maintenance crew when they shut down? Oh, most of them found work with other companies. Some retired, some moved away to find work in other states. The mining industry was changing, getting more mechanized, needed fewer people to maintain the equipment. What about you? Did you work for Cumberland directly, or were you always independent? Another slight pause, like he was trying to remember details from a long time ago. I worked for Cumberland for, let me see, about 15 years. Started there right out of high school, worked my way up from apprentice to head of mobile services. When they closed down, I decided to stay in the area and keep providing roadside assistance to drivers who needed it. The math didn't add up. If Cumberland had closed 21 years ago, and Mavis had worked for them for 15 years before going independent, he should have been running mobile service for at least 21 years. Not the 25 he'd mentioned earlier. But I didn't press the issue. The man had fixed my tire professionally and efficiently, and I was grateful for the help regardless of any confusion about timelines. What do I owe you for the tire and service? Let's call it even at $200. That covers the tire, labor, and travel time to get out here. $200 was less than half what I would have expected to pay for emergency roadside service in such a remote location. But I wasn't about to argue with good fortune. I paid him in cash, and he gave me a business card that was worn and faded like it had been carried in his wallet for years. Mavis Crenshaw Mobile Tire Service. 24-hour emergency roadside assistance, serving eastern Kentucky coal country. But there was no phone number on the card, no address, no modern contact information. Just his name and a general description of his service area. How do drivers usually get in touch with you? Oh, I monitor CB Channel 19 when I'm working these roads. Somebody needs help, word gets around pretty quick. Small community out here, like I said. I thanked him for his help and continued my journey to Hazard. The new tire performed perfectly, and I completed my delivery without any further problems. But during the drive, I kept thinking about Mavis Crenshaw and something that nagged at me about our encounter. When I got to a truck stop with Wi-Fi, I decided to do some research on Cumberland Mining and their former employees. What I found made my hands shake as I held my phone. Mavis Crenshaw had indeed worked for Cumberland Mining Company as head of mobile tire services. He had started there in 1985 and had been with the company for 17 years when he disappeared on December 15, 2002. He had been responding to a call for roadside assistance from a stranded coal truck on Route 23 near Beaver Creek when both he and his service truck vanished without a trace. The search for Mavis had continued for weeks, involving local law enforcement, mining company security, and volunteer search teams. They had found no trace of him, his truck, or the coal hauler he had been dispatched to assist. The case remained open but inactive, classified as a missing person investigation with no leads or suspects. December 15, 2002, 20 years ago to the day. I had been assisted by a man who had been missing for exactly 20 years, driving a truck that should have been found and impounded decades ago, using equipment that should have been sold off or scrapped when Cumberland Mining closed their operations. But the tire on my truck was real. The service had been professional and effective. The business card was in my wallet, even if it didn't have contact information that would work in 2022. I called the Kentucky State Police to report my encounter, thinking they might want to reopen the investigation into Mavis Crenshaw's disappearance. The detective I spoke with was polite but skeptical until I mentioned specific details about the missing mechanic that hadn't been released to the public. "Ma'am, you're the fourth person this year to report being assisted by Mavis Crenshaw on Route 23. Always the same description, always the same location, always involving tire problems or mechanical failures. What do you make of these reports? Officially, we maintain that Mavis Crenshaw has been missing since 2002, and any reports of encounters with him are cases of mistaken identity or misunderstanding. And unofficially, Mavis was the kind of mechanic who took pride in never leaving a driver stranded. Maybe that's the kind of commitment that doesn't end just because someone goes missing." The detective went on to explain that all the reported encounters with Mavis followed the same pattern. Drivers with tire problems or mechanical failures on isolated stretches of Route 23 would be approached by a middle-aged man in coveralls driving an older Ford pickup equipped for mobile tire service. He would provide professional assistance, charge reasonable rates, and disappear after completing the work. Every driver who reports these encounters describes him the same way, right down to the business card with no phone number. And every time we investigate, the repairs he's made are real and professionally done. Have you ever tried to track him down? We've had patrol cars in the area during several of these reported encounters, but they never see any service truck or anyone matching Mavis's description. It's like he only appears to drivers who actually need his help. 3 months later, I had another delivery that took me through the same area. Different load, different destination, but the same route through the hollers of eastern Kentucky. As I passed the spot where Mavis had fixed my tire, I decided to try an experiment. I keyed my CB radio and transmitted on Channel 19. "This is Beulah Whitmore looking for Mavis Crenshaw Mobile Tire Service. You out there, Mavis?" The response came immediately, clear as day despite the mountainous terrain that usually interferes with radio transmission. "This is Mavis, Beulah. Good to hear your voice again. How's that tire holding up?" "Tire's running perfect, Mavis. Just wanted to thank you again for the help." "No thanks needed. That's what we do out here. Look out for each other. You having any problems with your current load?" "No problems. Just passing through. But I wanted to ask you something, Mavis. Do you remember what happened to you on December 15th, 2002? Long pause on the radio. When his voice came back, it sounded different. Confused, distant. December 15th, I was responding to a call. Coal truck broken down near Beaver Creek. Driver was stranded, needed help. But I can't remember. Did I reach him in time? Mavis, you've been missing since that night. Nobody's seen you for 20 years, except for drivers who need roadside assistance. Do you understand what I'm telling you? Another long pause. When he spoke again, his voice was sad but not surprised. I wondered about that, Beulah. Time gets funny out here in the hollers. Days blend together. Calls for help keep coming in, but I never seem to get home anymore. Haven't seen my wife or kids in, well, I guess it's been a while now. Mavis, your family's been looking for you for 20 years. Everyone thought you were dead. Maybe I am, Beulah. But there's still work to do. Still. Drivers who need help on these mountain roads. Can't abandon my post while people are depending on me. What happened that night, Mavis? What happened to the coal truck driver you were trying to help? I found him. Truck had gone off the road in the fog, rolled down into a ravine. He was hurt bad, needed medical attention. I tried to get him out, tried to call for help, but the fog was so thick, and then everything went white. Next thing I knew, I was back on the road, and someone else was calling for tire service. Mavis Crenshaw had died trying to rescue another driver. But instead of moving on to whatever comes after life, he had continued working, providing roadside assistance to stranded truckers throughout eastern Kentucky. For 20 years, he'd been answering calls for help, fixing tires, jumping batteries, and keeping drivers safe on dangerous mountain roads. Mavis, don't you think it's time to go home? Your family misses you. I know they do, Beulah, and I miss them too. But there's still work to be done, still drivers who need help. Maybe someday, when these roads don't need me anymore, I can rest. But not yet. The radio went silent after that, and I never heard from Mavis again during that trip. But other drivers continue to report encounters with him, always in the same area, always involving professional roadside assistance from a mechanic who's been missing for over 20 years. I've talked to his widow, Helen Crenshaw, who still lives in Prestonsburg. She's not surprised by the reports of her husband continuing to work after his disappearance. Mavis always said his job was taking care of drivers who got stranded in the mountains, she told me. He took that responsibility seriously, maybe too seriously. If there's a way for him to keep doing that work, even after whatever happened to him, that would be just like Mavis. She asked me to pass along a message if I ever encountered her husband again. Tell him I understand why he can't come home yet. Tell him I'm proud of the work he's still doing. And tell him that when he's ready to rest, his family will be waiting for him. I've delivered that message during subsequent trips through eastern Kentucky, broadcasting it on Channel 19 whenever I pass through Mavis's service area. I don't always get a response, but when I do, his voice carries a note of gratitude that makes the effort worthwhile. Mavis Crenshaw disappeared 20 years ago, trying to help a stranded driver. But he never stopped working, never abandoned his commitment to keeping people safe on dangerous mountain roads. Death ended his official employment with Cumberland Mining, but it didn't end his sense of duty to the trucking community. If you're ever driving through eastern Kentucky coal country and you have tire trouble or mechanical problems, don't be surprised if an older Ford pickup pulls up behind you with a friendly mechanic ready to help. Pay him what he asks, thank him for his service, and don't ask too many questions about how long he's been working these roads. Because some commitments transcend death, and some mechanics never really retire from taking care of drivers who need their help. Mavis Crenshaw is still out there, still answering calls for roadside assistance, still making sure that no driver gets left stranded in the hollers of eastern Kentucky. And that's the kind of dedication that makes the trucking industry a brotherhood worth belonging to, even when some of the brothers have been missing for 20 years. Name's Ivy Mae Thornton. Been running these Virginia mountains for 8 years. What happened at the Big Walker Mountain Tunnel in March 2023 taught me that some passages don't just connect places, they connect seasons that ain't supposed to meet. I was hauling auto parts from Norfolk up to Charleston. Standard I-77 run through the tunnel. Entered on a cold March morning. 28 degrees, frost on the windshield. Bare trees looking like skeletal fingers against gray sky. My CB was crackling with weather reports about possible snow moving in from the west. The tunnel's about a mile long. Nothing unusual about it, except how my radio went completely dead the second I entered. Not static, not weak signal. Absolute silence, like someone had pulled the plug on every frequency. Even my truck's engine sounded muffled, like I was driving through thick cotton. But when I emerged on the other side, everything was wrong. It was summer. Full, blazing summer. Heat that hit my windshield like opening an oven door. Temperature gauge shot from 28 to 89 degrees in seconds. Trees were full green, flowers blooming, cicadas screaming so loud I could hear them through my closed windows. The air conditioning couldn't keep up with the sudden heat. My CB crackled back to life. All drivers be advised, excessive heat warning in effect. Temperatures hitting 95 in the shade. Dots recommending reduced speeds for heavy vehicles. I checked my dashboard clock, same day, same time, but the world had aged 4 months in a 1-mile tunnel. My fuel gauge showed the same reading, my odometer had barely moved, but somehow I'd driven from March into July. Pulled over at the first truck stop, hands shaking on the steering wheel. Calendar on the wall showed July 15th. My logbook still said March 15th. The clerk looked at me like I was crazy when I asked what month it was. July, honey. Been hotter than Hell's Kitchen for weeks now. You feeling all right? Look like you seen a ghost. I called my dispatcher on the truck stop payphone. According to him, I'd been missing for 4 months. My truck had never shown up in Charleston. Family had reported me missing. DOT had suspended my license for abandoning my load. But on his end it was July, and I'd vanished in March. But I had only been gone 20 minutes. Drove back to the tunnel that afternoon, hoping to reverse whatever had happened. Entered from the west side on a blazing summer day, radio cutting out same as before. The silence inside the tunnel felt different now. Expectant, like the mountain was holding its breath. Emerged in March again. Cold, frost, bare trees. My dispatcher acted like I'd never missed my delivery, like I'd been running on schedule all along. I've tested it 6 times since then. Every time I enter from the east in March, I exit in July. Enter from the west in July, exit in March. The tunnel doesn't just go through the mountain. It goes through time, connecting winter to summer in a loop that traps drivers between seasons that shouldn't meet. Other truckers have reported similar experiences, but only on specific dates. March 15th and July 15th. The rest of the year, it's just a normal tunnel. But on those dates, the Big Walker Mountain Tunnel becomes a doorway between seasons. Some drivers have gotten stuck in the loop, driving back and forth, trying to find their proper time. They say you can see their trucks sometimes, ghostly outlines in the tunnel, still searching for the exit that leads home. But on those dates, if you enter Big Walker Mountain Tunnel, you might exit in the wrong season entirely. And time keeps moving forward, even when you're moving backward. I'm Opal Crawford, 15 years hauling coal equipment through Kentucky. Last February, I got a delivery order that changed everything I thought I knew about what's possible in these mountains. The order came through normal channels. Deliver mining equipment to Millfield, Kentucky, coordinates 37.2431 degrees north, 83.1821 degrees west. Standard coal country delivery, except for one problem. Millfield don't exist on any map. GPS showed nothing but dense forest. Asked locals at truck stops, nobody heard of it. Even old-timers who'd lived in these hollers their whole lives just shook their heads. But the coal company insisted, deliver the mining equipment to Millfield by Friday, or forfeit the entire payment. $5,000 for a single delivery, too good to pass up even if the destination was questionable. Followed the coordinates anyway, driving deeper into the mountains than I'd ever been. 20 miles off US 23, a dirt road that shouldn't exist according to every map I had led me through forest that felt older than time itself. Then I saw the sign. Millfield, population 247, coal capital of eastern Kentucky. Millfield was real, all right. Company buildings, equipment yard, houses with well-tended gardens, even had a proper main street with a general store and diner. But everything looked wrong. Too clean, too new, like a movie set version of a mining town from decades ago. The foreman, Dolores McKinney, was waiting for me at the equipment yard. She signed for my equipment with a fountain pen, paid in cash. Crisp bills that smelled like they'd just been printed at the mint. Asked me to stay for dinner at the company cafeteria. Said it wasn't safe to drive mountain roads after dark. Place was full of miners in spotless coveralls, families eating together at long tables, kids playing games that looked like something from my grandmother's childhood. Normal, small-town scene. Except nobody talked about anything that happened after 1967. They discussed Vietnam like it was current news, worried about rising gas prices hitting 35 cents a gallon. Excited about color television finally coming to the mountains. When I mentioned cell phones or the internet, they looked at me like I was speaking Chinese. One woman asked if I meant the telephone party line. The food was real enough. Pot roast and mashed potatoes that tasted like my mother used to make. But the conversations around me felt like echoes from another time. People discussing plans for a future that had already passed 50 years ago. Left the next morning after a night in their guest quarters, but when I tried to find Millfield again a week later to ask questions, there was nothing there. Just empty forest where a whole town had been operating. No roads, no foundations. No trace that hundreds of people had been living and working there just days before. Research at the county courthouse showed Millfield Coal Company operated from 1952 to 1967, when a methane explosion killed every person in town. 247 miners, families, children. Nobody survived. The place was evacuated by the state and officially removed from all maps in 1968. Declared too dangerous for habitation. But it's still there, still operating, still stuck in 1967, and serving dinner to visitors who stumble across coordinates that lead to a town that died 55 years ago. The people don't know they're dead, don't understand that their world ended in fire and gas. The money was real, though. Deposited fine at my bank, even though the bills were printed in 1963. Some places refuse to accept that their time is over, and some towns keep running long after the last inhabitant should have gone home. Hiram Stone here, 23 years on these mountain roads. This is my last story because after what happened on the Cherahalla Skyway in October 2022, I ain't driving trucks no more. Some routes change a man, and some change him in ways he can't come back from. I was hauling furniture from Asheville down to Chattanooga, taking the scenic route through the mountains instead of the interstate. Cherahalla Skyway's a beautiful drive when weather's clear. 43 miles of mountain highway that'll take your breath away, winding through some of the most remote wilderness in the southeast. But that night, fog rolled in thick as cotton, the kind of mountain fog that swallows everything and makes you feel like you're driving through the clouds themselves. Visibility dropped to maybe 10 feet. I was creeping along at 20 miles per hour, hazards flashing, when I started seeing other trucks in the fog. First one, then 5, then a whole convoy of big rigs running the same direction. All different companies, all different loads, but we formed a natural line through the fog like we'd planned it. Standard safety procedure for mountain driving in bad weather. CB radio was alive with chatter. Convoys looking good, maintain following distance, watch for deer crossing, keep those flashers on. Standard trucker talk, except something was off about the voices. They sounded hollow, distant, like they were coming from far away instead of the trucks right around me. And the static, there was always static between transmissions, the kind you get when signals are bouncing off mountain ridges. Mile marker 15, one of the voices said, "This is where I went off the road." Deer jumped right in front of me, nowhere to go but over the guardrail. Truck rolled 4 times before it stopped. Mile marker 23, black ice got me here. Truck jackknifed, rolled 3 times down the mountainside. Took the rescue crew 6 hours to find what was left of me. Mile marker 31, brake failure coming down the grade. Couldn't stop, couldn't steer. Took out 2 cars before I hit the bridge abutment. Families in both cars didn't make it either. Each voice was describing how they died on that exact stretch of highway, marking the spots where their careers and lives had ended in twisted metal and broken dreams. That's when I realized I was running in a convoy of dead truckers, drivers who'd been killed on the Cherrahala Skyway over the years and were still making their runs, still trying to complete deliveries that ended in fatal crashes. "New driver in the convoy," one voice said, sounding like it was coming through water. "You don't belong with us yet. Take the next exit, get off this highway before you become permanent part of our route." "There ain't no exits on the Skyway," I radioed back, my voice cracking with fear. "There is tonight. Look for the lights. We've opened a way for you, but you gotta take it now." Sure enough, I saw exit signs that shouldn't exist. Ghostly green signs illuminated by lights that seemed to come from inside the fog itself. Off-ramps that led down into valleys I'd never seen before. Roads that curved away into darkness that felt welcoming instead of threatening. Took the first one I found, driving away from the convoy of ghosts while their voices faded on the radio. "Safe travels, driver. Watch your 6. Keep the shiny side up." Found myself on US 129, 20 miles south of where I should have been. According to my GPS, I'd traveled through space as well as time, somehow ending up on a completely different highway. Next day, I researched accident records for the Cherrahala Skyway. 17 truckers have died on that highway since it opened in 1996. Mechanical failures, weather conditions, wildlife encounters, all the causes the voices had described, all the ways a mountain road can claim a driver's life. And every October during peak fog season, other drivers report encountering the phantom convoy. Trucks that appear in fog vanish when visibility clears, and always try to guide living drivers away from the same hazards that killed them. I turned in my CDL the next week. Some roads are meant for the living, and some are meant for the dead. But the Cherrahala Skyway serves both, and once you've run with that convoy, you understand that death don't always end a trucker's career. It just changes your route to places the living ain't supposed to go.